Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming on Power Talk, please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. We can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And one of the sponsors of my program is our Zach Wagner, and he was nice enough to connect me with a guy who's actually gone through the vocal cords of many of my guests, and I never actually thought I'd be able to connect with this cat. Decorated pioneer in equipment rentals and studio rentals all over the great United States, a total pioneer. Dolph Rempp, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you.
First question I have for you, Dolph. Could you talk about the first time that Alu Raka came into your studios?
Well, I mean, that's tough. That's a long time ago. So I'm not real sure. I'd have to look that one up.
You know what I'm getting at? I've been doing my research, and there's a lot of stuff online that sort of has, something like, sometimes drummers will say, I want every drum you have at the studio. And I think back to when you were opening your store. When I interviewed Hal Blaine, he played at the Monterey Pop Festival with Ravi Shankar and Alu Raka, and that was 1967. Yeah. So I'd like you to at least talk about how you acquired, maybe the better question is how you acquired Indian percussive instruments during that time.
Yes. Well, I mean, it wasn't 67. It was a little after that, but MGM Motion Picture Company and their lot went into bankruptcy, and so they had a big auction. And they, just invited come one, come all, and they just basically auctioned off all their props. And, there were just hundreds and hundreds of every kind of drum you could ever think of because of the motion pictures that were made over the years by MGM. They made a lot of all types of pictures, and they needed all types of props. And, of course, not all of them were props, but some of them were props, and that was a period of time when, 20s, 30s, 40s, there were a lot of different interests in music, particularly in South American music and various other kinds of music that they did films on. So that was a resource that we were able to catch on to, and, we probably got 300 drums from them of all kinds, sorts, and descriptions.
So that makes sense, but then I'm just trying to get an idea of like where cats would go. Where was Earl Palmer or prior to SIR opening? Where were these cats going to? Were they going to thrift stores to get drum kits? What was available for them before SIR?
Well, about a dozen or so really well-known percussion players and at the same time drummers had a very large collection of every kind of little miscellaneous bell, whistle, drum, whatever it is that they could use on a sound scoring stage for scoring a movie, create some little special sound, however it was. They kept, quite a large complement. In fact, when they would get called for a big motion picture sound scoring, it would take a whole truck to bring all their various trunks and drums to that sound scoring event. And that was collected by them for, or passed down to them over the years, because a lot of what they had was 50, 75, 100 years old. And those various people, I don't know who they passed their gear on to, because as you know, sound scoring isn't as prevalent as it was back in the 50s, 40s, 30s. Now there's a lot of, sound that can be put onto computers and then transferred onto recording. So that's not as popular, even though I think some of these great old large collections of just everything you could ever imagine that would make a noise, not even a drum, but just anything that made a noise were collected by these various sound scoring drummers. And they also did pop stuff too, but it was just a part of where these unique sounds came from.
Talking to Dolph Rempp here on the Jake Feinberg Show live on Power Talk. So I've done a couple interviews with Lalo Schifrin, but I just, could you talk a little bit more about like sound scoring itself? Like, I mean, I understand that you're talking about today, a lot of stuff can be replicated on computer, but in the past, could you talk about a time when you got a call and you know that it was maybe you had djembes and you had cuicas and you had congas and you had bongos and timbales and you had could you just, was there a time that who were the major film cats that were coming, the composers that were coming to you and inquiring about these different types of instruments that increased sonic expansion?
Well, I think most of the time we received calls from what they call editorial services. The editorial service company was the one that put together the big sound scoring show event, you might want to call it, and they had a large sound stage in each one of the big studios because in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, that's where they scored everything. And a lot of those big sound scoring stages, particularly at Paramount or Warner Brothers, Disney, Universal, they had a lot of stuff they had collected over the years. And I don't know exactly where Lalo Schifrin would have got his ideas for the sound that he wanted, but I think in a lot of ways he left it up to the conductor and the percussionist to come up with something unique, and they would put it on right at the date. I don't know how often Lalo Schifrin was at the recording date, the sound scoring date. I think he wrote the music and then he passed it on to the editorial service, and then they would acquire whatever they thought they needed for that. If the studio had it, maybe in their stock, and there was a big stock of miscellaneous stuff, they could go look for it. But I think for the most part, they just called one of these percussionists that had a truckload of stuff, and they would bring it over. And it wasn't particularly the items that we would normally think of as Latin items, the ones you just mentioned, cuicas, timbales, things much odder than that.
Like what?
Much more unique. Just various types of drums from every part of the world that were collected whenever they were looking for things that were unique, particularly visually, because as you know, film scoring is a sound scoring, but in the film that's being shot, there usually has something to do with that small drum that they're playing.
Right.
So that's where they're trying to replicate a sound. They may find an unusual looking, unique instrument. It may not even play. It may just be a prop. So then they have to make up what they think would be the sound that would make. So every type of idea or thought that somebody had for something unique, would end up in a film was really up to that percussionist to come up with something. And these guys had, tons of experience. So of course that was, not difficult for them. And they just had, drawers of miscellaneous little bits and pieces of different things that they could, in fact, join together to make a sound that maybe never existed.
100% correct. I mean, Hal was telling me when he had to replicate this tabla sound, and he didn't have a tabla in the warehouse at Warner Brothers, and so he had to. I don't have the quote up in front of me, but he had to basically, replicate. He found the replication and he made it himself. It made a drum that sounded like a tabla. But some of the more unusual. I mean, I thought I was being unusual with cuicas But what are you? Is there one that stands out in your mind that you remember seeing in a film, and you're like, wow, we rented that to them?
Well, I mean, if you think about some of the older films that were made, 30s, 40s, 50s, a lot of them were made with some kind of a safari, you know, look.
Right.
In other words,
Right.
And so they were playing all kinds of drums, and when they would send the people out to look for locations, location scout, let's say they were going to have something that was shot in Africa, they would pretty much just go to whatever resource they could find, and the one that they found that they liked, you know, may have had a group of drummers or a group of anybody that had something unique, and they would try, if it was unique enough, to integrate that into the film, into one of the scenes. And so then, of course, when it came to the actual recording, then of course they had to go out and try to find that type of instrument. And Hal Blaine was really a studio drummer. He was not a percussionist. He can do percussion. He can do anything. He's a fabulous player. But he was not a person that would come to a studio with 10 trunks of gear.
No, I know who would. Let me ask
that
you.
That wasn't his specialty.
No.
He was really kind of...
Dolph, I want to ask you about one cat in particular. There's a couple, but a cat that I visited, Toluca Lake, actually was responsible for advocating for bathroom breaks for the percussionists. First time ever, Emil Richards. Did Emil come by?
Yes. Yeah, well, Emil wrote a book, and in the book was hundreds of different pictures of the variety of things that he had in his collection, and he was a very popular percussionist. And, you know, every gong, every bell, I mean, things from India. As you know, there's many different types of smaller bells that they use for all types of services, and that's where a lot of the inspiration came for those kinds of instruments to be used based on a film that was being made, and those are how they got into the soundtrack. But someone like Hal Blaine, he was busy 3, 4, 5 times a day just doing pop tunes, because he had sets of drums, not one, not two, not, you know, maybe 3, that he had his cartage guy chase all over town to set up so he could go from one session to the next. But from my knowledge and years and years that I knew Hal, he was mostly a guy that was doing all the great old rock and roll tunes that you hear. Absolutely.
No, but with Emil, he went on a goodwill tour with at the behest of John F. Kennedy and was able to start his collection of now set close to 9,000 or 10,000 percussive instruments. But so he filled up Sinatra's Belly of the Plain back in '65 with his own collection. But what he, I mean, yeah. You're talking about Bobby Hall, Gary Coleman. Who were the cats that were coming to Dolph and saying, Dolph, I need something that sounds like this? Could you give a specific time when a percussionist showed up and had some sort of request you were able to deliver it for him, was not your normal delivery?
Well, all I remember is when Jimmy Webb called me, he called me up and says, bring me every drum you have. and literally that was a truckload of drums.
What was for
when he was doing some stuff out at Universal.
Right. But as far as...
But I mean, you know, most of the time, from my experiences, we would get someone that was looking for something unique to actually come into our store and start to go through stuff and listen for sounds and try to find what they thought they were looking for, then maybe take a dozen things with them for a scoring session. But there wasn't a lot of pop drummers, or what you'd call your classic guys that got hired to do pop music that were using anything other than their set of drums, which was perfectly set up to record the sound that they were looking for. And yeah, every once in a while we get somebody to show up, needed some bells or needed this or whatever they needed, but for the most part, their drums were set up and tuned so carefully that they could just get right at it. The minute they sat down, they could just get right at it. They didn't need to tune anything or change anything because they had the sound that the producer was looking for, particularly that pop sound. That was the sound of their drums. And the way they played was the way that those producers knew, and that's why they hired him. They didn't have to spend much time with him. In other words, they could just come right in and sit down, and just second, third, they had it done. It was just like a machine.
The pop drummers, that's great. Please tell me about this cat who has been, he basically built his own instruments. It was Harry Parch.
Yeah.
Did Parch?
Well, yeah, there's always guys that come up with things like boobams that they actually make. We used to have a couple of different sets of types of drums that were actually made by somebody. But for the most part, they were not well known enough, other than just their own selves using it at a recording session. I mean, not many people knew what they had. I mean, there was no way to kind of advertise it. There was no internet. So, if somebody had something like a baritone marimba, which was 8 feet high, they had no way of knowing who this was until he showed up at a session with a big bass marimba and played it. And I know Drum City had that. They had the only one in town. We also had one. But, those kinds of insider people knew where everything was. And that's why they would get the call, these percussionists. They would get the call because they were insiders. And they knew exactly where all the goods were.
So boobams, you would take on you would maybe bring some of these in, because was there a time where people would call up, and could you talk about a time when you took in somebody's original instrument that they made that was unique, and then somebody calling up and saying, hey,
well, like the boobams, that was an instrument that somebody made, and it had, say, 14 different sounds on it. And
we can say it's Parch, right? It's Harry Parch.
I don't know if that was his or not, because we had 3 or 4 different types and different sets of that.
Interesting.
So, we would get people who would come to us and say, listen, this is my invention. This is what it does. What do you think? Do you think you could rent it? And we'd say, well, we can try. We'll put it in our inventory of interesting drum things, and people come in all the time looking for different, interesting, unique sounds. So, it could be something they want, but we have no way of knowing because we don't write the scores,
Absolutely. All right, well, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I want you to settle in, take a listen to this voice, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
Became good friends. I walked in. I'd never heard any of their music. I got a call from Dolph Rempp, who owned SIR.
That's right.
And Dolph was a good friend. Like I said, my brother opened with him. Dolph goes, Kenny, there's a great band here. They got a record deal on Warner's, and they've been auditioning bass players for like 2 weeks. And he knew that I wasn't with Delaney and Bonnie anymore because we rehearsed them. He goes, you should check this band out. He gave me the phone number, and I called the production manager, who gave me Billy's number. I went over to Billy's house. Billy lived on Carroll and Sunset, which is a block west of Doheny, right off of Sunset. I went in, took my bass out. He was sitting at the piano. I tuned up to the piano, and I just tuned up and went, da-da-da-da-da. He goes, you don't have to audition. Just come and play, just like that. He said, just come and play with us. He just heard me just tune my bass and play a few notes. And so I walked in. So what are we going to do? Oh, we have this song called Brides of Jesus. I said, okay, play it. They played it. I played it along with them. We have this other song called What's Up, and I played it with them. And we jammed for 5 hours. Hello on that?
All right, Dolph Rempp, who is that?
Kenny Gradney.
Kenny Gradney. So I just want you to talk not just about Little Feat, but when can you talk about some of the bands that, you obviously you were a music fanatic, and you knew good bands when you heard them. So some of this had to do with the fact that you were connected with Gabriel, but can you talk about some of the bands that you encountered that first came in to SIR, or that were renting the studio space?
Well, this is an awful lot of music. We're talking about 50 years, 8 studios full of 2 or 3 bands a day. So if we add those all up, let's say we got 24 bands a day. Okay, then we have 7 days a week. We got 365 days a year. We're talking about thousands of bands, all expecting that they have the hit record. They are rehearsing, for a showcase for a record company, et cetera, et cetera. And literally, we have done business with everybody. If there is a musician in the world that hasn't been to SIR, I don't know where he lives. I don't know where he's from. I don't know what he's doing. But he's not in the mainstream. And that's not to brag or say, hey, we're the only ones. There's lots of other places. But we certainly have had, I would think, most everybody come through our doors and spend some time. And that's how we've gotten to know over the years a few of these people, because, you're able to make friends when they're rehearsing or when they're hanging out, versus going to a concert where, of course, they're getting ready to do their concert and they're not really thinking about anything casual. It's very serious and they're getting ready to play. So, in New York, I know we started out with Barry Manilow. He was one of our first customers. New York Dolls was a customer. Who else was back there? Kiss. I think they might have been our first customer in New York in 1974. I don't know how long ago that was. I can't remember my own name if you ask me real quick.
Well,
now.
You're pretty good. You're doing just fine. The thing is that you need to build a reputation. So can you talk about a major turning point early on when somebody came and said, we're going to sign on with you, and it kind of gave you credibility, word on the street? As you said, we were not all interconnected. But when you first opened up, can you talk about kind of a pivotal moment for you guys and who you brought on board? By 74, your name was already out there. You were in Frisco, you were in LA. So in the beginning, who came aboard?
Well, a couple of our really good first customers was in LA, specifically LA. Besides, of course, our first customer was Jimi Hendrix in 1967.
Wow, I don't think I realized that. Jesus.
Yeah.
How did you connect with Hendrix?
Well, a friend of mine that I went to school with at UCLA, Lenny Warnaker, his father owned Liberty Records. And so when he got out of school, just like myself and Ken, my partner, he was looking around for a job. I guess his dad didn't hire him, so he went to work for Warner Brothers. And so he called me up and said, hey, I've got some guys coming in. They need some space. What do you got? And I was working with my friend from high school, Brian Bruderland, whose brother is James Brolin. Mm-hmm. And he had a studio that he was just getting started and trying to, figure out how to find some customers and stuff like that. So I thought, well, does he need to record? And he goes, no, I think all we need to do is rehearse. So I go, okay, well, we can use it for rehearsal too. So I would say that was actually our first rehearsal customer. And that was in 1967 at Paramount Recording. And he ended up recording there and did Purple Haze there. So, over the years, we just started from there and just kept going. Our first kind of early customer that didn't have any name or any association other than the fact it was a band was Steppenwolf. And John Kay was signed with Joe Salyers, just as the other band that he had, Three Dog Night. So in the early days of our rehearsal studio on Santa Monica Boulevard, when we built one in 1970, those were a couple of the guys that we, of course, knew nothing about other than their music was great, but they had no real notoriety. And we saw them come into our studios, rehearse, and then just go on to become huge stars. And those are the earliest that I can remember that came to actually L.A.
It was there was something there about a wah pedal too.
Oh yeah, that was when Jimi Hendrix came in with his band. They were always looking for something new. They wanted to record. They wanted something that was a little different, a little unique. They just came from England. So yeah, that was one of the items that he was asking me for. He says, "Hey, you got something that's a little different, unique. Maybe they don't have that." So I was chasing around, got a precision bass for him, chasing around, got a wah-wah pedal, a Baldwin electric harpsichord, just something that he could use to try to make something new. And he settled on this Leslie 145 Leslie 145 speaker, and he loved that. So, we got a lot of people, as I said, they come in for rehearsal, get to talk to them, meet them, and they end up asking you for things that are different from where they are, since they're now in the United States. And that happened with a lot of guys or bands that came in from England.
Right. So, did one of the things that's been a revelatory for me, I was born in 1978, and one of the revelatory things is to realize that all the guys that basically, we talked about Hal Blaine being an incredible studio pop rock drummer, Jim Keltner, these guys were playing stone jazz gigs. Who were the jazzers that were coming in there in the late 60s? I mean, I know I have Keltner on albums with Claire Fisher and Gary Foster. I have him playing with Gabor Szabo. Which jazzers were coming in?
Well, interesting. Jazz, of course, doesn't have budgets because they can't sell any records, unfortunately.
I dig.
Is difficult, and it's still difficult for jazz cats. So we basically, as you just said, we meet the guys that can play jazz but are playing pop music. In other words, yeah, they're all jazz players. Everybody is. It's a great player, but the way we meet them is when they're, recording, like Jim Keltner. As you know, he's been with various well-known artists over the years, everybody from James Taylor to Linda Ronstadt, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure he still plays jazz, but we don't see that kind of demand from the jazz side just because they have no budget.
No, absolutely. But it was still considered popular music when you first opened, so I have to believe that there were West Coast cats, and there were plenty of them. Shelly Manne, who came in?
Well, I mean, we ended up meeting various people. I can't remember exactly which ones at which time, but Shelly Manne, we used to do a lot of business with him because he had Shelly Manne's Manhole on Cahuenga, just up from Wally Hyder's studio. So
you are right. I love that. Okay, so break this down, man, because Wally Hyder's was directly above that. No,
it wasn't directly above it. Wally Hyder's on the corner of what is it, Cahuenga. Let's see, are they on Cahuenga? I think so. I don't even know. Cahuenga and Selma, and there's a coffee shop there. But two buildings up for that was Shelly Manne's Manhole, and they were very busy and very popular at the time. But that being said, I can't personally say Shelly Manne ever came in to rehearse because he could rehearse in his own club if he wanted to. I mean, we did a lot of stuff with the organ player.
Groove Holmes or Jimmy Smith?
Jimmy Smith, yeah.
So Jimmy probably kissed you, I bet.
Well, he wasn't a very happy guy.
Really?
He wasn't a real easy guy to get along with. He was kind of a little bit angry, and I don't know why. But he, was, not at first. I didn't know him well, but just having him order and get whatever, he wasn't particularly the happiest guy you could meet on the block. Whereas most jazz players are very easy. Most jazz players are really cool guys and easy to get along with, and just, but he, I don't know, maybe it was just a few times I met him that he was unhappy that day. He got up on the wrong side of the bed or something. I don't know.
Because Charles Lloyd was around there, Jack DeJohnette, these were all guys that, I mean, again, I'm going back to the infancy of SIR when jazz was a popular music. It no longer is. Some people would say jazz is completely dead. But it was a very popular music still in the late 60s. So, I mean, Were you what you had just gotten out of UCLA, but were you always had aspirations to be in the biz, or even as a musician? Where were you? Even though you didn't know where this was going to take you, what did you did you want to be a musician at first?
Well, of course, everybody wants to be a star, right? Everybody wants to be noticed. Everybody wants to have everybody think that, you're somebody important.
Right.
But,
Mm-hmm.
I sang a little bit and just had some fun with it. But, of course, I realized I didn't have any talent. So I wasn't looking for that kind of a future. But the way we got into it, as I said, was through Brian Brudlin, our friend that had a recording studio, because he was with originally Bobby Sherman. I don't know if you remember him. He had a TV show, and they had a band, and he was the bass player, and they wanted to try to figure out a way not to have to spend so much recording. So that was Brian's idea of putting together a recording studio, and it was called Paramount Recording on Santa Monica. And so we were simply helping our friend who had no money, like everybody when you're 23 years old, right? And just lots of aspirations. So we were there to help him because he needed some help and had no money to hire anybody. But that's how we kind of got into it, the music side of it. And then by helping him, we of course met musicians, and then they would tell us what they wanted, and that's how we ended up being SIR, Studio Instrument Rentals.
Yeah, that's what I was talking. I was just transcribing my interview with one of my interviews with Norm Harris, from Norm's Rare Guitars. He said that he said to me that I'm going to read this to you. He said Leo Fender started a company, but he had people like Doc Kaufman, Porky Freeman, George Fullerton, and other folks who were the designers of a lot of their instruments based on the musician's needs. And this is what I want. This is my question for you. This goes on. He goes, a lot of times they actually went out to the clubs and they talked to musicians. Well, what do you guys need? What can we make for you that's going to have practical application? Please tell me about Dolph Rempp trekking out to the Lighthouse or to the IT Club or somewhere ever you used to frequent. Did you go and actually who did you get input from early on? Because what I love is the person-to-person stuff. The idea of saying, what do you need, man? Where are you playing? What kind of sound do you want? Can you give an example of going into those clubs and getting the direct feedback from the musician?
Well, I can't give you an example of going into a club specifically, but I can give you an example of talking with Eric Clapton when he first came over with Cream. And, of course, he was always looking for something, too. So he was hoping that maybe being that we were a rental company, we had some kind of an unusual amp that he hadn't heard of that he could try out that wasn't available in England because, he played Marshalls. And we actually had something that was pretty interesting. A guy by the name of Mike Dacey, who was a keyboard guy that used to play with Hal Blaine.
Oh, yeah.
He had a guy make him an amp, Benson, it was called, Benson. And I gave that to Eric. I said, well, here's something that we have in our store. It doesn't belong to us. I can't rent it to you. I could call up Mike and ask him if you could borrow it, but he played that and he thought, oh, that was great. He goes, I got to have one of these. And so I called up Mike and said, hey, you want to sell your amp? He says, no, I love that amp. The guy made it for me personally. He says, I'm not selling that. And I go, well, I got Eric Clapton over here. He really loves it. He wants to play it. And he goes, he can play it all he wants, but I'm not selling it. So that was an instance where he really liked that. And he said, maybe we could come up with a new idea for speakers. And I go, well, I don't know. What are you thinking? And he goes, well, maybe we could take like a bass drum and make that a speaker and see what the sound of a round instrument. Well, it's not really an instrument. A round, speaker would make any difference. So we did that. And he played it on stage. It was cool. He took a bass drum, put a couple speakers in it. It sounded interesting. I mean, my sound sense is not the same as his, but he thought it was kind of cool.
That is it. See, now we're finally cracking open the vault here with Dolph Rempp. I mean, that was a fantastic story. I mean, did you do work with Howard Rumsey?
No, I don't remember anybody that was named Howard. I don't know if you'd probably tell me.
Well, no,
more about
he
him.
had the club, the Lighthouse, in Hermosa Beach.
He's way down in Hermosa Beach. Yeah, he's still around. I don't know.
I did the last interview with him. He passed away a couple years ago. But the Lighthouse, I mean, because the Crusaders were coming in, Mongo Santa Maria. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how far was the radius of SIR in Southern California? Were you all over the place?
Well, I mean, you're in another area that we're really not in, like the Jazz Cats. Well, they're around. We know what they are. They rent upright basses from us or a set of drums. But all of what we know as the excitement, the interest, and where all the PR was based toward, rock and roll bands. Those are the people that, got all of the PR and all of the interest and excitement, that was the Led Zeppelins, the Jimi Hendrix, the Eric Claptons, the Cream, those kinds of bands. And there were a lot, Blue Cheer, et cetera, et cetera. That's who we did business with, because they needed somebody to help them, versus a jazz cat that's used to doing it pretty much by himself and doesn't have any budget to do anything. So those are the record company bands that were becoming very popular, and the record company would call us up and ask us to tech their show or bring them some gear or help them on tour, whatever. And that was our specialty. We're not a jazz rental house because, jazz players have no money.
Dolph, I mean, all I'm saying is it's all music, man. Like, I just think genres have destroyed music, and my show is anything but the pop or the whatever I get what you're saying in the idea that it drove...
But, I mean, that's how we were able to build a company, is through the record companies, because musicians don't have any money to spend for the most part. So who's going to get things going and get things underway to the point where you're able to then get on your own feet and do your own thing? It's the record companies. They're the ones that sign the groups. They're the ones that put them in the studio. They're the ones that provide production services for them, which includes recording and musical equipment and all the things that they need. Jazz people have been playing jazz forever. They know how to do everything by themselves. They don't need any help. They just get their stuff together and off they go. And that's still the way it is for jazz guys. We rent an upright bass every once in a while, a keyboard, because they're definitely around, but they don't have much in the way of a budget.
Well, there was, but you're going to have to flesh this out, because I think you said, was it Larry Waronker? How do you pronounce his last name? The cat who owned Liberty Records?
Oh, yeah, his dad. Waronker.
Okay. Waronker, yeah. Yes. So, but I mean, because
the reason why we kind of knew him was because he had signed Ken's brother, and Ken's brother was Jan of Jan and Dean. And I'm sure you're familiar with Surf City, Little Old Lady from Pasadena.
Those were the songs those were the songs Dolph Rempp was singing, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was the era.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I did.
And Jan was in our fraternity at UCLA, Jan and Ken both. So those were the people that we knew, and they were our age, whereas the jazz guy might be 60 years old. And they're always very welcoming and great guys, but we don't come in contact with them very much.
No, I was going to say, because you must have been involved a little bit with Dick Bach. I mean, World Pacific was doing some serious world music and jazz music.
Yeah, we did stuff with everybody. But I'm just saying, if you ask me where the emphasis was and where the growth in our business was, it was rock and roll.
Absolutely. Well, I got another voice to play for you here. I want to see if you can peg this, and then we'll come back and break it down.
It took a while. I would not even, I had my own grand piano and organ, and I had all the instruments that I actually played with him. I didn't play grand, I take that back, but I had it. but organ and synthesizer, Fender Rhodes, whatever we were playing around at the time. But I would not take it out on the road. I refused to let my gear go on the road with the Jerry Garcia band because I was afraid of them. I really was afraid that I didn't know what it was and what's going on, and I could lose my stuff or something go down and nobody cares enough about me to get it back, and I'm somewhere out of town. And so for almost 2 months, they rented from SIR the gear they wanted me to play.
Okay, so that's a company in the Bay Area?
Yeah, it's Studio Instrument Rentals.
Okay, all right. That was from, just to show you how far back I've been promoting SIR in my program, is May 13th, 2012. I would venture to you want to give a guess on who that might be?
I have probably no recollection of that because I mostly spent my time here in LA. I wasn't that involved with the SIR San Francisco on a daily basis, but we did a lot of things with the Doobies, with Santana. Goes all the way back to Chipolina. You name it, Sal Valentino. We still do a lot of business with Neil Young. He's up in the Bay Area. So, honestly, I can't.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That was Melvin Seals, who's an organ player who was very close with Merle Saunders. You knew Merle, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about Merle?
What's that?
Can you talk a little bit about Merle Saunders?
Merle Saunders. Well, let's see. I have to think a little bit about that.
The point is that Melvin and him had a company together in the Bay Area, but Melvin was freaked out because he was from the church, and when he came on the road, when he joined the Jerry Garcia band, he walked into the San Rafael studios, and it was full of skeletons on the walls, and it freaked him so much that he would not trust the roadies with his own gear, so he rented from SIR. But I'm going back. Yeah. So if you could talk about, I just connected with the great sound engineer Dan Healy, and John Chipolina was actually the first rock and roll guy. All the other cats up there, Country Joe and the Fish, the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Santana not so much, but they were all folk musicians. Chipolina was the first rocker. So could you talk about your collaborations with Chipolina?
Well, what about Moby Grape? Moby Grape were there before John Chipolina.
Well, no, I don't think Jerry Miller. This is interesting. So wait, you say Moby Grape was on the scene? Jerry Miller was on the scene before Chipolina, because Chipolina.
No, he was playing rock and roll music. You said that John Chipolina kind of was the first one up there playing rock and roll music, and I think Moby Grape had albums up there of rock. Everybody was folk rock at that time, as you know.
Well, Santana wasn't, and nor was Quicksilver.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm just saying that there was some rock and roll around. I think that was a part of that evolution of going from, what we know as the early kind of folk rock to full-on, glam rock. Who knows where it ended, but I know that there was. I listened to the oldies but goodies, and there's a lot of rock players on there. And that goes back to the 50s.
Well,
so,
yeah.
Maybe we don't have saxophones, or maybe we don't have some of the instruments that were most popular, but there were still some people that could play guitar back then.
Could you talk about
in that rock
vein? No, I'm just saying that I've been talking. I've interviewed a ton of the cats that were from that scene, and they were playing like essentially folk tunes, but they'd leave the head of the song, and then they'd get into this improvisational or jazz aesthetic. So it became sort of, and then of course you mix psychedelics into it as well, and it's a whole different story. But when you SIR was humming along in LA, and how did you first connect with? Who did you first connect with from the Bay Area that made you want to expand out to there?
Well, we had good customers in the form of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, And that's when we moved up to the Bay Area, because they were in LA recording at Wally Heider's, and then they moved up to the Bay Area, and they were working in the Bay Area, and they said, hey, we need your help, guys, come on up and figure out how you can be up here to help us, because we were helping them when they were in LA. So I would say that's more around the 70s, you know. But when we did come there, we met, you know, the guy that was the road manager, sound guy, Herbie Herbert, and I don't know if you know of him.
The Journey. Absolutely, yeah. Herbie, we're friends on Facebook. Yeah, tell me about Herbie.
Yeah, well, Herbie's very, very, you know, well known in the Bay Area. You know, he was up there with Santana, and he was the sound guy. And he also had a good friend up there that was working in sound with him, who was actually piloting the helicopter that killed him and the impresario, Bill, that's his name?
Bill Graham.
Bill Graham, yeah.
Well, hold on. You're telling me that helicopter went down, Bill Graham, and who else went, and Herbie went down?
No, not Herbie. His good friend and my good friend, Steve, I try to think of his last name.
Don't worry about it. I remember it well. I remember, well, that was an infamous day with, how quickly though, I mean, so you connected with Crosby, Stills. I mean, there's an epic record, if I could only remember my name, David Crosby, and that was recorded at Wally Heider in San Francisco. But I mean, what was I guess what I'm saying is, what was your competition up there beforehand? What were cats doing to get their hands on stuff? And because I mean, you're talking about LA was like, you know, the studio capital of the world, and it was just beginning to really burgeon at that point. San Francisco prided themselves on being exactly the opposite. I mean, obviously they had Fantasy and you know, the record plant, but there was just so many bands. There was so much live activity. I mean, you had Tower of Power, Sons of Champlin, on and on. Can you talk a little bit about how you, Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young, that's a big player, but who were some of the other people that you had encounters with? I mean, how quickly did you connect with Bill Graham, and did you work for the Fillmore? Did you house stuff in the Fillmore?
Oh yeah, that was daily, weekly activity. You know, that was something, you know, that just went on and on and on and on for how many years were they in business? 20 years, 30 years? I don't even know. They still got a Fillmore up there on the second floor.
Right, not the original one on Geary though.
No. And they had Winterland. Remember that Winterland? That was a huge venue that was just ongoing. I mean, that had some of the best musicians playing there ever. So, you know, those are daily activities, and we do that all day, every day. Deliver stuff, pick stuff up, you know, do all the stuff they need to get their show going. And, you know, that's why I say we've had pretty much contact with every major artist in the world.
Did you have any contact with Rock Scully?
I don't know who Rock Scully is. I may have. I can't remember everything.
Absolutely. Sometime he was the manager for the Grateful Dead and Jerry Garcia. I mean, what were your run-ins and encounters with? What I find interesting is that radio interview I did with Melvin from 6 years ago. That was from 1983. I mean, that story he was talking about was more like 81. I'm just curious about your recollections and your memories of encounters with people from the Grateful Dead.
They didn't pay their bills, I'll tell you that.
What are you talking about? I mean,
So, you know, when you do business with somebody for a while and you try to help them, they don't pay you. After a while, you don't do business with them anymore. And I think that was our experience with early Grateful Dead. And you know, you can understand it. I mean, they had a lot of people in the band, no money, so what can you say? I mean, they became very, very popular, but it was still kind of like a very difficult, you know, customer for us.
But, okay, just going back to that clip we just played with Melvin, by 81, maybe you had buried the hatchet because Jerry Garcia Band rented from you guys for a long time until Melvin felt comfortable bringing his own stuff on the road.
Yeah, but, you know, I'm just saying when they started out, just like all bands start out, you know, they just had their own way of trying to survive. And one of the ways of trying to survive was not to pay people. So, they ended up having their own PA company and their own this and their own that, which was probably a good idea. They had great sound. They had a great sound company. And I think it's still in the Bay Area now, still doing business.
Did you do work with Dr. Patrick Gleason?
I don't know who that is. We did work with Dr. John.
No,
one of our first customers.
Really? He was one of your first customers?
Yeah, he was at Gold Star across the street. He was the music director for Sonny and Cher.
That's right, at Gold Star. Phil Spector was there. Also, the young guys from War were there. Howard Scott and Harold Brown were singing with a young act. But so Gold Star was one of the major. Gleason had different Fur studios up in the Mission
that's
District,
in San Francisco.
Right. You said you're opening. I mean, like. Your next? Did I hear you correctly? Nashville is your next shop?
Oh no, we've been in Nashville since the '70s. We're opening in Dallas.
Now talk about the demand and why, and maybe it seems obvious. Everything's bigger in Texas, but why Dallas?
Well, I mean, big city. Lots of people call us up. Austin's close by. There's a lot going on there. Thriving music scene happening there. So. We get a lot of calls, particularly around South by Southwest, the big festival they have. So we just decided that's the next good spot for us. Can you hold on 1 second?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You back?
Yeah.
Okay. The thing one reason I brought up Shelly Manne before was because of this instrument that was developed by Richard Waters called the Waterphone. Do you remember getting the Waterphone?
No, don't remember that. I'm sure we must have if they say we did.
Well, I'm just
but
curious.
As I said, we're in a lot of places with a lot going on in all these places, from New York to Nashville to Florida to Arizona, you name it. And have you been to our Arizona location?
Where? No, I'm in Tucson. Where is it? In Phoenix?
Yeah.
And so what kind of activities, do you have people that are, I have not been up there.
Yeah, next time you come into town, check it out. JB's the guy that runs that, and they always got lots going on there. They have the big museum there. You've been to the museum, the Instrument Museum?
Well, I interviewed Pat Martino there, and I'm going up to interview this Indian raga musician, and then Tower of Power is coming in, so I'm going to get a chance to hang with Garibaldi and those cats. So yeah, but that's not where SIR is it?
No, that's kind of way out on the north side or wherever that is, going toward that beautiful resort up in the mountains.
Yeah, it's up in Scottsdale.
Yeah. So I've got to go now. I've got another appointment. So I have to say goodbye. And good luck.
I just have one final question for you. If you could just for younger cats out there, if you could talk about a time in your career where you faced a huge amount of adversity and how you overcame it and how it made you a stronger person today.
Yeah. Well, that's like every day. There's so many things that happen in the music industry.
I'm talking about when you were younger and you were insecure and you didn't have the names SIR. I'm talking about that kind of thing. I understand you go through hassles every day, but you're on the glide path. I'm talking about some inspirational story when you almost walked away from the whole thing and why you didn't and how it made you stronger.
Well, let's see. That point, I guess, would be when we were first helping Brian with his studio, because he was kind of in that situation where he's 3 months behind in the rent, had no customers, had all his money in it and all his dad's money in it. And he certainly couldn't have paid us. And we just tried to think about, hey, the guy's getting ready to kick us out of the recording studio. What are we going to do? And at that point, we were very lucky because I met a great guy I don't know if you've ever heard the name Artie Ripp.
R-I-P-P?
R-I-P-P.
Yeah.
Kama Sutra Records.
Kama Sutra Records. And what happened then?
Yeah. He loaned us some money.
And that's how you opened SIR?
Well, that's how we kept our friend, Paramount Recording, from, getting kicked out of his building, and that was a turning point where we were able to sustain ourselves long enough to start getting going again. So those are the days where you eat peanut butter sandwiches for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because that's all you can afford. So, those are the days where you just got to hope that something good's going to happen, and for us, it did.
How quickly after that did SIR open?
Well, we were kind of open then. We were helping Brian, our friend, so we were trying to get stuff together for him. As I said, when artists came in, like Jimi Hendrix, we were running around trying to find stuff that he could use in his recording, and that was kind of the beginning of SIR.
Dolph Rempp, I'll be reaching out during the Hanukkah season to do set 2 with you, but thank you so much, man. You're very good at you're very good in these stream of consciousness interviews, but we got a lot more to do, my friend. It was great to hang with you.
Okay, thanks for calling. Enjoyed it.
Later on, Dolph.
Bye-bye.
Bye.